Scarcity is kind of a buzzword in economics. Uh, People claim to understand the meaning of it, and obviously there's a colloquial meaning of it, but there's an economic understanding too. A lot of people tend to want to express scarcity as meaning merely that item X is only available in a limited quantity, and that's it. When in fact, really, to explain it more adequately, you want to say that item X is in a limited quantity at a given price. Price can change what's potentially available, and that can happen in several different ways. For example, if I can outbid everybody on a particular item, that item is no longer scarce to me, it's just scarce to other people. An item can exist in massive quantities, but be difficult to access in such a way that there is, and again, this technically is a price limitation. So give you two good examples of it. One would be early 1800s. Aluminum is a known thing, but it's scarce because they're only really able to utilize nuggets of aluminum they find that are very pure, whereas aluminum is typically locked up in bauxite at very or harder to extract quantities. So in the early 1800s, one of the thing, aluminum was primarily used as for plates and utensils for the super rich. They would use aluminum as a status symbol. And Napoleon at the time was looking towards mass production of aluminum because he figured if he could make a lot of things the soldiers carried lighter, they could either make them faster or they could carry more critical things like food and ammunition, which would allow them to get to where they were going. Obviously, he wasn't able to pull off what he wanted. And the issue is part of it's technology, but to a certain extent, a lot of the technology was already theorized and some of it already in function. Somebody who went to that time period, let's say somebody traveled back in time and they understood the electric processes of extracting aluminum from bauxite, and they went back to the early 1800s. In theory, they would probably be able to set up a system because they're close enough to the event of where it actually happens. They have the knowledge, and most of the stuff already kind of exists. It's not that far off. That time traveler could start mass producing aluminum at that point. However, the startup cost would be astronomical. So if you had enough money, you could overcome the scarcity of it. We see something similar to what was going on with shale oil. Now, if you talk to people who were technically competent people in the early 2000s and said, hey, we're going to extract shale oil and it's going to be absolutely viable when we do it, most of the people at the time were saying, nope, nope, nope. Shale oil will never be viable because it's always going to be a larger cost of energy input than you're going to get out. So the energy ROI will never work. Well, obviously things changed between then and now to where if the market price is now high enough, we are capable of extracting that in a market viable way. So the thing is that oil was always there. It theoretically could have been extracted, and if somebody probably traveled back from today to the early 2000s, unless something really novel hadn't been invented yet, they could put together the infrastructure for shale extraction. Now, because shale oil is still marginal in terms of your ability to extract it, there's a good chance that it may not have been economically viable even if you had the know-how how to do it at that time, because the startup costs would have been so severe. But the point being is scarcity isn't a brick wall. Scarcity is a scaling factor based on what is going on technologically, what is going on in terms of price demand. And if something, let's say the oil supply, the readily available oil supply in the early 2000s got more critical than it did, it would drive a lot of research to that area. In all likelihood, a lot of what we are using now to extract shale oil probably would have been available a lot earlier. This is something to keep in mind when we talk about other things that are scarce. Water is a good example. Now, if you say, well, water is in extremely limited supply on Earth, well, that's an extraordinarily false statement. 7/10 of the surface of the Earth is covered in water, and we have incredibly deep oceans loaded with it. The answer is readily available fresh water is somewhat limited. However, as readily available fresh water gets harder to come by as the population grows, there's going to be a drive in that direction, and at some point, you aren't going to hear people say water is limited, because we're going to be tapping the oceans and desalinating at a technological level beyond what we currently can do. And it's at some point it'll settle down to a level where ocean water being changed to fresh water is only going to be marginally more expensive than it is now. And a lot can be said for virtually every metal on Earth. The solar system, if we look at the percentage of metals that are on Earth in comparison to the entire solar system, Earth isn't the greatest repository of metals in the solar system. There's a lot of other places that have huge concentrations of metals that we need. When the price becomes feasible, due to demand or due to it becoming harder to find the things here, it will ultimately become feasible to tap into those other metals. So I guess the best way to think about the idea of scarcity is a good example of defining what is going on at a given moment. However, scarcity is not this giant wall that we'll never cross or go around. So if we think of scarcity only in terms of the now, we have a really good, then you are using scarcity in economics in the right way. If you're using scarcity in economics as a way of predicting the future or having an idea where things will be 10 years from now, then you're using scarcity incorrectly. Okay, hope that clears that up. Maybe it's useful to you. Thank you for spending time with me.